To think you know the Tudors, the dynasty of power, blood, and legend? Think again. Buckle up, because the truth carved into Princess Margaret's corpse was so much worse than any chronicle dares to tell you. A princess so cursed in death that surgeons risked eternal damnation just to cut her open. A chamber so cold and forbidden that even the candles sputtered as if the walls themselves recoiled. A body so poisoned, scarred, and mutilated that its secrets threatened to shatter the dynasty's fragile throne. You're about to uncover the hidden curiosities of Margaret's autopsy that make Game of Thrones look like children's theater. From a womb marred by forced experiments to organs blackened with arsenic and mercury. From whispers of miscarriages erased in silence to the deliberate burning of every page that recorded the truth. These are the revelations that will change everything you thought you knew about England's most ruthless family. Her body wasn't just a corpse. It was a confession, and that confession had to be buried. And don't forget to follow, like, comment, share, and subscribe, because this is the kind of forbidden history they never wanted you to hear. Picture this. The chamber was cold, the kind of cold that crept into the bones and made even the living shiver. Shadows clung to the stone walls, broken only by the tremble of candlelight that burned too low, struggling against the draughts that sighed through cracks in the floor. On the table, stretched out and wrapped, not in velvet as a Tudor princess should have been, but in rough linen already damp with death, lay Princess Margaret. Her stillness should have been final. Yet in that room she was alive with meaning. Around her stood men in long black gowns, their eyes darting to one another as though they feared being caught even in silence. Their hands hovered near knives that gleamed in the dim glow, instruments of a forbidden act. They were not priests come to offer blessing or mercy. They were surgeons, ordered to trespass against both nature and God. To cut into royal flesh was unthinkable. Royals were meant to be untouchable, sacred vessels of divine right, carried whole from chamber to chapel, never opened, never examined. But Margaret was not to be honored. She was to be broken. She was no longer a sister, a daughter, or a princess. She was a problem, and problems were solved with steel. The air thickened with dread as the first incision was made, the blade sinking into pale flesh. A faint hiss seemed to escape, as though her body itself resisted, exhaling secrets it had held too long. The cut widened, her skin parting under pressure, and what had once been royalty was reduced to organs, bone, and blood. Scribes leaned in, their quills scratching hurriedly across parchment, recording details they already knew would never survive. For every note inked was destined to be destroyed, every word burned to ash, leaving only silence behind. Margaret was being carved open not for truth, but for secrecy. In that room, her body was evidence in a crime too great for history to remember. Margaret's life had always been lived in shadow. While Henry thundered through wives and wars, breaking Rome itself to satisfy his hunger for a son, while Mary bathed England in fire for her faith, while Elizabeth forged herself into a legend draped in virginity and power, Margaret drifted on the margins. Chroniclers barely inked her name, her life dismissed in a few neat lines. Yet silence in Tudor history is rarely empty. It is the silence of things too dangerous to be spoken aloud. Behind the glitter of court life, Margaret was not seen as a woman with thoughts, dreams, or desires. She was currency. Her worth was measured in the weight of alliances, in the strength of the heirs she might bear. She was expected to obey, to wed as commanded, to carry in her womb the insurance of the dynasty's future. But Margaret was a vessel that did not fit the dynasty's desperate designs. Whispers clung to her like shadows in the corridors, rumors of pregnancies that ended before they began, of bleeding that could not be controlled, of frailty that no healer could mend. Some said she resisted matches proposed for her, others that her body betrayed her before politics could make use of her. Attendants who served close to her rooms carried stories they dared not speak beyond a whisper. that the princess wept at night, clutching her stomach, that she vanished from court for weeks at a time, returning thinner, paler, her eyes hollow but her lips sealed. To the Tudors, such fragility was not merely a tragedy. It was a threat, a princess who could not serve her purpose, who carried mysteries in her body rather than heirs in her womb, became dangerous by default. She was not Margaret the beloved. She was Margaret the liability. And liabilities in the Tudor world rarely lived long enough to tell their side of the story. Her decline was neither sudden nor merciful. It began as whispers, servants remarking that the princess no longer laughed, that her steps slowed, that her cheeks lost their bloom. What started as fatigue deepened into a wasting sickness that no one could explain. She grew paler by the week, her body shrinking inside the gowns tailored to hide her fragility. Meals went untouched, her appetite fading as if food itself betrayed her. At first, courtiers dismissed it as melancholy. But then came the trembling. Cups rattled from her hands, embroidery needles fell from her weakening grasp, and soon she could not walk without leaning on attendants. At night, her cries pierced the palace walls, ragged wails that made even guards cross themselves in fear. Blood began to stain her sheets, dark and sudden, and though her attendants scrubbed it away before morning, rumors spread through corridors like smoke. Physicians were called, their remedies as cruel as the sickness itself. Thick draughts of mercury were poured past her lips. Powders of arsenic disguised as tonics pressed into her hand, lead rubbed into her skin in the name of beauty. Each cure carried the weight of poison, each treatment another nail in the coffin of her body. Was this medicine or murder? Some said she had miscarried, the evidence hushed up by terrified attendants. Others whispered that she was being used by court doctors desperate to unlock the mystery of Tudor fertility, experimenting on her as though she were a subject, not a princess. Whatever the truth, Margaret slipped further from life each day, until one morning she lay pale and still, her chest refusing to rise again. Her death was recorded as illness. But in the Tudor court, illness was often a mask worn by poison. Her body should have been treated with reverence, wrapped in silk, carried with solemn procession, and laid in a chapel where prayers would be sung for her soul. But that was not to be. Margaret's remains were taken not to hallowed ground, but to a hidden chamber, stripped of sanctity and prepared for knives. For most royals, the body was a vessel of divine order, never to be touched. Yet Margaret was seen as something else entirely, a specimen, a riddle that demanded solving. The surgeons approached not as mourners, but as men called to dissect a secret. The linen was peeled back, revealing the princess in the harsh glow of candlelight. Blades gleamed in the trembling hands of men who knew they were committing sacrilege. The first cut was made, slicing across her abdomen, skin parting like parchment torn too quickly. A hiss escaped, the sound of air trapped within, and some swore it was as though her body sighed in protest. Beneath the incision, her organs glistened, silent witnesses to whatever had ravaged her. Bowls filled with fluids, parchment scratched with hurried Latin notes, and the chamber filled with the stench of blood mingling with damp stone. No psalm was spoken, no prayer was whispered. Margaret was not honored as a daughter of kings. She was reduced to a specimen on a table. Each man present knew the risk. They were carving open not only a body, but the dynasty's facade. Every discovery they made carried consequences that could topple thrones. And so, though they recorded, though they examined, they did so with the knowledge that their work would never be preserved. What they uncovered in that chamber was not for history. It was for silence. Inside her body, the truth lay waiting. The surgeons bent close, and what they found made their hands falter. Her womb bore marks no young woman should carry. Scar tissue twisted across it like the traces of old wounds, its walls marred by lesions. Some swore the shape itself had been altered, misshapen by crude intrusion, as though Margaret had been subject to procedures forced upon her in life. Others whispered of repeated miscarriages, the evidence etched into her body. But the most chilling theory was that she had been used as an experiment, her womb invaded by the hands of Tudor physicians desperate to solve the dynasty's curse of infertility. To them, she had not been a princess, but a vessel to be studied, a body pressed into the service of knowledge. In the flicker of candlelight, her organs became political evidence. Was this proof that her body had been poisoned, or was it the damage wrought by mercury, arsenic, and lead? Substances meant to heal, yet given in doses that killed. The men dared not speak too boldly, but their faces betrayed them. They knew what they saw, and what they saw could never reach the world beyond that chamber. For if word spread that Margaret had been broken by her own kin, experimented upon like an animal in a cage, the dynasty itself would be stained. So the notes were hurried, coded in careful Latin, destined for fire. Her womb was more than flesh. It was a confession. But confessions in Tudor England were buried. Even more unsettling were the traces of poison. Her organs, it was said, bore signs of contamination. The liver showed strange discoloration, the stomach lining streaked with black. Substances familiar to any courtier lingered within: mercury, arsenic, perhaps even lead. These were the twins of Tudor medicine and assassination, used as readily to cure as to kill. Mercury, prescribed for ailments, corroded the body from within. Arsenic, favored by poisoners, left behind a wasting sickness easily mistaken for natural decline. Lead, painted onto faces in cosmetics, seeped slowly into the bloodstream until death became inevitable. The princess's body carried them all. Were they medicines given too freely, or poison slipped deliberately into her cup? The theory of poison spread like a shadow, even in that secret chamber. To some, it was obvious. Margaret had been eliminated, a liability erased before she could bring scandal upon the family. To others, the truth was subtler and no less sinister. She was a victim of her own physicians, men so desperate to cure and experiment that they turned her into their subject, sacrificing her in pursuit of Tudor heirs. Whatever the cause, her body told a story that contradicted the one the court would proclaim. She had not died peacefully of illness. She had been undone by poison, by medicine, by hands that treated her less as royalty and more as material. And that was the truth the autopsy revealed. A truth too dangerous to be written, too scandalous to survive. The silence that followed her autopsy was not born of reverence, but of fear. What had been discovered inside Margaret's body was never meant to leave that chamber. And so began the cover-up. The notes, scratched by trembling scribes, their parchment still wet with ink, were quietly gathered, reviewed, and consigned to fire. The physicians who had dared to wield knives over royal flesh were warned, some sent into obscure exile, others silenced by the weight of oaths sworn under threat of death. Official records would mention nothing of what had taken place. The cause of death was neatly recorded as illness, a word bland enough to satisfy public curiosity, yet vague enough to conceal the horror of truth. Chroniclers were instructed to speak of her no more than in passing, reducing her existence to a footnote in dynastic history. But the erasure was too deliberate to be overlooked. Some letters survive in fragments, court attendants writing cautiously of procedures never before attempted, of whispers echoing in corridors, of royal scribes ordered to blot out entire pages of record books. Accounts contradict each other, as though deliberately designed to confuse. Some describe a swift death, others speak of months of agony. Some imply her body was buried intact, others hint at strange delays in her funeral preparations. This confusion was not accidental. It was crafted, a smokescreen of contradictions designed to bury one simple fact. Margaret's body had betrayed Tudor secrets that could never be acknowledged. In silencing her, the dynasty did more than conceal an autopsy. They erased a woman. Margaret ceased to be a sister, a daughter, a princess. She became nothing more than a shadow stitched into silence. Her erasure was purposeful. For if her story were told, if the truth of her condition, her treatment, or her poisoning had been admitted, it might have shattered the fragile facade of legitimacy upon which the Tudors built their rule. The autopsy was not just about her, it was about the throne. Yet bloodlines have a way of surviving erasure. Whispers in genealogical records suggest that Margaret's lineage may not have ended with her. Illegitimate children, carefully hidden, perhaps even born in secret unions, may have carried her blood forward. If so, her autopsy was more than the examination of a corpse. It was an attempt to control a future that threatened to spill beyond the boundaries the Tudors had drawn. For if she bore children outside of sanctioned marriages, those heirs, however illegitimate, could destabilize the throne. It was safer to erase her completely than to admit the possibility. Thus, the princess was not only cut open in death, she was cut out of history. Her erasure speaks volumes about what her body revealed. In Tudor England, women were political instruments, and their value was measured by their ability to produce heirs. If Margaret was proven barren, her body was an embarrassment. If she had miscarried or delivered children in secret, her body was a scandal. And if she had been poisoned, her body was a crime scene. Any of these outcomes threatened the dynasty. By burying the autopsy, by erasing her story, the Tudors buried all of it. The truth was too volatile to exist in history books. Margaret became not just forgotten, but forbidden. The implications went far beyond one princess. If Margaret's autopsy revealed infertility, it mirrored the struggles of Henry VIII's own wives, an echo of the dynastic crisis that nearly tore England apart. If it revealed secret children, it challenged the legitimacy of succession itself. And if it revealed poison, it exposed a court where family murdered family to secure power. Her body, in essence, was a mirror of Tudor politics. Scarred, poisoned, and silenced. And that is why she had to be erased. What made Margaret's autopsy so dangerous wasn't merely what the physicians saw, it was what those findings implied. In Tudor England, truth wasn't defined by evidence, but by what the crown allowed to be believed, and Princess Margaret's body, once opened, refused to obey that rule. It raised questions, ugly, lingering, dangerous questions. Her womb bore scars. Her organs revealed signs of long-term internal trauma, irregularities that no royal physician could easily explain. There were no signs of disease that matched the records, no natural cause of death, but there were lesions. Tissue damage, abscesses. The kind seen in women who had either suffered multiple miscarriages or had been subjected to forced medical interference. The official records said nothing. But the evidence inside her said everything. The implications of those findings echoed far beyond the surgical table. If Margaret had miscarried repeatedly, it begged the question, who was the father? If she had conceived in secret, where was the child? If she had been rendered infertile by crude experimentation, who gave the order? And if she had been poisoned, if traces of mercury, arsenic, or lead truly had been found in her bloodstream, then someone, somewhere, had made a calculated decision to end her life. Whether for political safety, dynastic control, or scientific ambition, someone within the crown's inner circle had judged Margaret to be expendable. But the most chilling threat wasn't her death. It was the possibility that her bloodline had survived. The royal family had always feared one thing above all: the uncontrolled heir, a child born in secrecy, away from the palace's eye, raised under a different name with no loyalty to the crown, but with a stronger claim than the heir who sat upon the throne. And Margaret, tucked away from the spotlight, slipping further into silence in her final years, would have been the perfect vessel for such a child to pass unnoticed. Rumors of secret births had always swirled through court corridors. A young boy raised by a baron's widow. A red-haired girl smuggled out of court after a mysterious illness. Coincidences, perhaps. But in light of what the surgeons saw, such coincidences became loaded with consequence. And if Margaret had conceived, if her blood still flowed through the veins of some hidden descendant, then the Tudor monarchy was never as secure as it claimed. Every ribbon cut at a coronation, every oath sworn to a crowned ruler, was perched atop a fragile lie. The autopsy had not merely opened a body, it had reopened the question of legitimacy, not just of one princess, but of an entire dynasty. In the end, the darkest Tudor secret was not a single fact hidden in a ledger or a name scratched out of a parish book. It was the method. Power, she learned too late, is not content to rule the living. It claims dominion over the dead. Margaret's body proved it. Once she had been a princess with a place in the royal order. Afterward, she was converted into an argument, a caution, a silence. The autopsy was not medicine, but choreography. The chamber cleared, the linens burned, the knives wiped clean, the notes consigned to ash, and then the story rewritten to say nothing had happened at all. That was the secret. Not merely that she had been poisoned or experimented upon, or that a child might have been spirited away. The secret was that the monarchy possessed a machinery capable of making truth disappear and of replacing it with something smoother, safer, and obedient. He looked at how the ripples moved outward through time. A funeral made quiet, a vault chosen because it was convenient, not commemorative. A line in a chronicle pared down to the size of a fingernail clipping. The people were given the performance of closure, but never the substance. Those who remembered Margaret learned not to say her name aloud. Those who could have testified learned to speak in generalities, and those who came after learned to recognize the scene where a page had been torn out and to pretend they did not see it. Still, bodies keep their own records, and so do places. The chamber where she was opened never lost its draft. Even years later, candles guttered there for no reason anyone could agree upon. A clerk who filed inventories noticed gaps he could not reconcile. A missing basin, a set of instruments listed and then struck through, a locked chest with a key that would not turn. A monk tasked with reciting prayers over royal dead felt the weight in his throat whenever he reached the year of her passing. He stumbled, recovered, and kept going. In such small stutters, the past persists. If there was a child, that child grew into a person who learned to keep their head down, to accept money without asking, to repeat the family story as it was given, not as it felt. If there was no child, the possibility remained like a shadow cast on a wall by a candle already snuffed. Either way, uncertainty proved stronger than certainty, and rumor more durable than proclamation. That, too, was part of the method. So what remained of Margaret? A name thinned to a whisper, a grave that answered questions with stone, a dynasty that continued with the outward confidence of bronze statues and painted virgins, while the inward knowledge of what it had done turned like a hidden screw. And yet, despite every effort, her story survived in the only place power cannot fully police, in the human need to ask why. Why the quiet funeral? Why the sealed room? Why the page missing from the ledger? In the spaces where those questions live, Margaret lives too, not as a saint or a scandal, but as proof that even in the brightest ages of pageantry, the truth still bleeds through.